Hello, Zula. How are you? Welcome. Thank you for being part of this project. How are you today?
I'm good. How are you? It's good evening here, but I guess good morning to you, right?
Yes,
In
absolutely.
Ulaanbaatar, it's 7 p.m. and I'm very excited to talk to you on, about Mongolia, doing business in Mongolia and the cultural aspects.
Thank you so much. No, we thank you for accepting the invitation. And for those watching for the first time, the idea of this project is to invite professionals, international experts like Zula. We have Zula Orgodon from
Mhm.
Mongolia. And the idea is to invite professionals like Zula to talk about the cultural and communication aspects of doing business in their countries, in this case, in Mongolia. So thank you so much for your time. And like we've done with the other interviewees, we have seven standard questions, and we will
Mhm.
begin now. So Zula,
Okay.
thank you again. The first question is, tell us a little bit more about you and the work, the kind of work that you do, please.
Mhm. Sure. Well, I was born and raised in Mongolia, but I've had the opportunity to study and work and travel around the world, including Singapore, where I did my master's, and US, where I also did an exchange, etc. But yeah, I'm a Mongolian woman who is actually doing different kinds of initiatives and enterprises based out of Mongolia, but trying to have outreach internationally. And one of the initiatives I have been developing is called Doing Business in Asia Alliance. And I think, Doing Business in Asia Alliance has the most relatable experiences of mine for our discussion today. So the idea above the DBIA is actually to be able to connect businesses from mostly developing nations, but it can be actually from any other nations to grow in their respective markets through actually better communication and better partnerships. So it's aligned with your project, this communication project, and that's why I'm actually, excited to talk about a bit more based on my experiences matching businesses as well as organizing different kinds of events and workshops that actually aimed to close the cultural gap between people coming from different nationalities. But besides DBIA, being founder of DBIA, I also have founded a social enterprise educated focused on educational programs, impact project management, and I also work with government and international development organizations through my, transformation and reform programs and projects management.
Perfect. Excellent. It's great to know you're involved in a lot of different initiatives, and not only in Mongolia and Southeast Asia. And it's interesting because Mongolia is still a country a lot of people want to get to know more about, and I know there's a lot of opportunities there, business opportunities. So someone having someone like you, speaking to someone like you, can also open a lot of insights and for us to understand how to approach the local business people, counterparts, clients. So we thank you for your participation today. The
Sure.
second question, Zula, what kind of things you recommend people to do or say when first
Mhm.
meeting or speaking with a person that they might be interested in doing a project or business
Mhm.
opportunity in Mongolia? And also, what should they not say or do when approaching the
Mhm.
Mongolian counterpart or clients?
Mhm. So when we talk about Mongolians, we should understand, our viewers should understand that um, there are actually different groups living and working in Mongolia who have quite different background in upbringing and, of course, in their way of life that includes doing business. For example, most of the time, those who do not have first-hand experience or encounter with Mongolia still imagine Mongolians as those living in gears in the countryside, riding horses, etc. That kind of lifestyle and that kind of livelihood is still there, mostly in the countryside, although they actually have adopted lots of advanced technology and techniques, machines to help them. there's still these nomadic families and nomadic livelihoods are still existent. I would say 60, not 60, around 50% of the population are still living as nomads in the countryside, and 50% are living in the cities. And in the cities, even in the cities, there's a big difference between the capital city and the other second or the third biggest cities. And in the countryside, we have 21 provinces, and each province has its centers. So the centers also have more advanced lifestyles than the real rural areas. So there is different kinds of social groups and people. You're talking about, when you talk about Mongolia, it's not like, for example, most European countries where most people have been, living in the cities or, have are used to civilized, I guess, more city urban lifestyle. So most biggest part of the businesses have been built in the capital city as well as the bigger cities up until now. But with the increasing rising different kinds of issues in the capital city for the past few years or so, government has been promoting reverse migration, meaning, people should be actually moving back to the countryside or, actually taking advantage of all the resources and all the land available in the countryside as much as possible. And government has been trying to promote different kinds of incentives to do that. So when you talk about, what to say, what to keep in mind when talking with people in Mongolia, then, it's important to understand about this kind of different lifestyles and different settlements in the country. So as I said, the biggest part of the businesses have been concentrated in the capital city. So our Ulaanbaatar capital city, Ulaanbaatar means the translation is like Red Hero. I think the name was adopted during the socialist time before 1990s. We still kept it, but I guess that's not really the point nowadays because we're a very vibrant democracy, and people have been practicing different kinds of businesses with different nationalities. So there is actually professionals, a group of professionals who really do business up to the international, standard and practices. But there are those who are still learning to do business in more formal, in more standardized way. But there are those who still are new to like doing business in the more how to say with the proper management and proper governance, etc. Yeah, but I guess regardless of where they are coming from, most of the people, I guess for those who have more Western mindset, maybe Western upbringing, it doesn't apply so much. But those who still have that Asian, Mongolian cultural influence on them, they don't like when people start talking about, for example, finances as the first thing to say. Of course, foreign investors or potential partners are here to seek for business opportunities, but it is Mongols prefer to get to know who they are, what they like to do, what kind of family upbringing or values they have and the beliefs, etc., before they make the decision to partner with them, instead of talking about like big profits, etc. I mean, of course, it differs from people to people, but I think the majority of the people still value this kind of personal beliefs and personal level connection over profits. So that's, I think, something to keep in mind when maybe foreigners, come to Mongolia and look for business opportunities or business partners.
Perfect. Very, very important insights, Zula. Just to recap, for people, first, like you mentioned, it's very multi-ethical, ethnical country, right? So the foreigners should understand who they're talking with first, right? Who is their counterpart?
It is not very multi-ethnical, but
Oh,
it's like the diverse background.
okay,
Yeah.
perfect. Okay,
Yeah.
okay,
Yeah.
perfect. But
Because ethnic wise, the biggest ethnic group, like the minority ethnic group, we have Kazakhs,
oh,
and
okay,
they do not make up that big proportion, but the others are just common, the same groups and called Khalq. But what I was trying to communicate is like diverse background, yeah.
perfect. No, understood. Thank you for the clarification. At the same time, when they're coming, if someone is more city mindset or has a mindset more of the rural area or the background of the person, I think it's important to understand who they're meeting with when they go to Mongolia. And also like the very important point of getting to know the person instead of just starting talking to about business. So that's very important that people understand to connect with them first as a human person, then instead of just talking
Exactly. Yeah.
business. Very
Yeah.
clear. Thank you, Zula. Moving to the third question, we recognize that it is important to have a deeper cultural understanding of a local place when doing a business
Mhm.
there. What cultural aspects might be considered when doing business in Mongolia?
So, to continue the point I talked about in terms of different different groups with diverse backgrounds, um, there is a small proportion of the population who really has had the opportunity to get proper education that can, meet the international business standards and expectations. But majority of the people are still learning to do business in the proper way, with the proper management, execution, and communication, etc. Because Mongolia transition to democracy, open market economy in the 1990s, so about 30 years or so. But of course, in the first decade, it was about really trying to figure out, the governance structure, etc. So we usually talk about our business experience is actually limited to only 20 years or so. So people are still learning, yeah, people are still learning, and education institutions are still also developing good programs to prepare people. That's why I would say, I mean, of course, the good side about doing business with Mongolians is they are relatively warm people. We are relatively warm people. We are, how would I say, quite humane, maybe compared to some other nationalities. I mean, that's quite common in Asian culture, if you think about Thai or Cambodians. But our nomadic culture really, how would I say, brings the hospitality and openness to anyone, regardless of their nationality. But on the flip side, there can be unprofessionalism, coming from Mongolians in terms of time insensitivity or, not sticking to the plan, etc. Because that's still something, new business culture, new mindset people are still trying to pick up. For example, if I tell you, when you're traveling in the countryside and if you are with nomads living in the neighborhood, in the livelihood, they don't like to, for example, plan with exact timing because, they're still very much dependent on natural forces, right? So they usually say there's only three types of times in the countryside. It's only morning, afternoon, evening. So, and you don't get to plan for like exact timing. They usually say, okay, maybe in the afternoon, maybe after sunrise, something like that. So that has been the lifestyle, and people's mindset has been shaped around that kind of, how to say, not too much, time sensitive thinking for centuries. That's why even we have started living in the cities for the past how many years? 200-300 years or so. It's still, something people are learning, to adapt and to adopt and to apply in their business, doing business practices. So that is something, foreigners have to be conscious that, it might be hard to really have precise planning and expect Mongolians to adhere to it. But if that's why, those who are looking into expansion or doing business in Mongolia, they really should try to do their due diligence as much as possible before coming here so that they can really find that, professionals who can help them bridge this, gap, fill this gap between this, how to say, flexible mindset and more fixed, planning, etc.
Perfect. It's very interesting how there's a historical background behind explaining why things work as it does there. So it's very interesting. Yeah, this is something that good advice as well in terms of if someone wants to make something happen with a business, you have to do the due diligence, and it's part of the process. It's a new culture. They have to understand how the culture works. So very, very insightful. Thank you, Zula. For the fourth question, if someone does not speak Mongolian, what do you suggest a foreigner do to be able to communicate more successfully with locals in Mongolia? And in order to do business, how can he go about communicating with the locals?
Hmm. So after 1990s, the most common foreign language in Mongolia switched from Russian to English. So there's a lot of people who speak pretty good English, especially youngsters. So even in the countryside, I think nowadays you can go around without Mongolian, but speaking English. Not too, how to say, and face not too much problems, but not at the level of like doing business, yeah, maybe like daily, just basic communications. But of course, if you don't know the local language and try to do business with Mongolians, it's best to have a reliable partner who speaks both your language and the local language. Most of the time, even for the local partners, it's English, and in the city, in the capital city, especially with the professional group that I have been talking about, there's no problem. It's just like me, or even better than me, in terms of speaking English and having the, English exposure. But of course, besides English, if the local partner or even the foreigner makes the effort to be more understanding and, to be more flexible when they're speaking with different people, with nomads, with workers, or, with government officials, etc., they don't really care so much about you not speaking the language.
Okay, that's clear. Local translator. Your English is very good. That's why for those watching, if you're interested in doing business in Mongolia, I recommend you contact Zula. Your English is very, very good, actually. No, interesting. Because it came to a surprise to me. I really didn't think that a larger population would speak English that well. So that's it's a very a good surprise that to understand the realities in the country. Many countries, many interviews I'm doing, it's hard to find professionals with good enough English to connect with the local foreigners, with the foreigners coming in. That is, so it's very interesting that the market is seeing the need for communication, so they are educating the people with English.
Okay, so I was just going to say, for Mongolians, we're quite talented in learning and speaking different foreign languages, because our language itself has quite complicated sounds, but it comprises of, sounds from different languages. So it helps us to pronounce words and, different kinds of difficult words in the proper sound. So I would say, that's something that's helping Mongolian, especially youngsters, learn a different language, not only English, but Chinese, Korean, other kinds of Spanish, German languages as well. Yeah.
Well, that's impressive. That's impressive. I know your English is very good, so it's very, very interesting. Thank you. Thank you for that insight. Moving to the fifth question. This question has a lot to do with marketing channels. How do you communicate better to your consumers, either B2C, B2B? It has to do in terms of, well, the question is to get better results in visibility or sales. What are your recommendations on the most effective way to do marketing for products or services in Mongolia? So let's think of a a foreign company coming in and wanting to establish themselves in Mongolia. How should they communicate to their customers?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, of course, it depends on what kind of product or service they're offering. Most of the time, having the uh, personal networks or connections with the right company representation helps. That's why, if it fits the product or service, B2B always works best. In terms of B2C channels, now social media usage in Mongolia has escalated for the past few years, maybe decade or so. Especially Facebook usage is very popular in Mongolia. Those in the middle class, in the middle age group, the largest consumer group, Facebook promotion works the best always. Of course, the TV channels, the traditional channels are still there, but in terms of quick effects, Facebook is the go-to platform. Next one is Instagram, etc. Yeah, YouTube also. Increasingly, all these social media platforms have been have gained more and more traction for the past few years. And actually, interestingly, Mongolia has, I think, the most active user group of on Facebook after Asia or something like that. Our folks may be spending too much time on social media, especially Facebook, but for businesses, looking into those kind of effective promotional channels, I would say it's the social media.
Great, no, very very important point you made about it. They spend a lot of time, but it's also a big opportunity for businesses to see this as a large market marketing channel for them to use to promote their product and services. Great. Facebook and Instagram is what I understood. YouTube, you said, is growing as well,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Okay.
And of course, not just the platforms, but also partnering with the right pages or right channels, right influencers. All those trends are also seen in Mongolia. I think, as par with the global trend.
Fantastic. Great. Thank you. Thank you, Zulu. The sixth question really focuses on empathy, growing empathy with your local partner, establishing connection, the human connection. So the sixth question is: if a business partner in Mongolia wants to get to know you better, invites you to a local coffee, tea place, a restaurant, even a virtual happy hour, what are the kind of topics that people in Mongolia like to talk about that's not business related? So again, create empathy, connecting with the locals. What do you suggest?
Uh-huh. Sure. It's mostly family, I would say. They start asking if you are married, if you have any children, and if yes, how old they are, and what kind of schools or works they are doing, etc. That's like almost number one after of non-business related question Mongols like to talk about, to learn about the other person better. And of course, discussion about hobbies usually come afterwards, and it depends on what age and which group you're talking to, of course. But yeah, our families and hobbies usually work. For example, my husband also does consulting to international investors in setting up businesses in Mongolia. You know, we partner in that regard, and he has been helping many Japanese investors, for example, to set up their businesses, incorporate their business in Mongolia, because Mongolia has this extended economic partnership agreement between the governments of Mongolia and Japan, and now they are negotiating similar terms with the government of Korea. So after that agreement came into effect, to enjoy the benefits, many Japanese businesses started investing in Mongolia and vice versa. Yeah. So I know they talk about fishing, for example. They talk about horse riding, etc., and usually works well. And especially those coming from countries like Japan and Korea, where they do not have as vast open empty spaces as we do, they're very intrigued by the idea of like riding horses on the steppe and staying in gear, looking at the stars, etc. So especially if those kind of personal time, getting to know each other better, is spent out of the city in like in the field. I think in the wilderness. I think that the relationship goes to another level, the trust level increases. Yeah.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I've heard stories about. I have actually a friend who went to Mongolia for business, and I heard about the exciting trips to the rural part, riding the horses, that kind of experience in nature.
Yeah.
So, very interesting. So that's something to talk about as well, the locals, and to ask about the country, right, what to do and the places to
Mhm.
visit. Very interesting.
Yeah.
I need to go. I'm curious as well.
You should.
Absolutely. Thank you, Zula. Coming to our last question, also a very important one. What one word should everyone learn to say in Mongolian and why?
Mhm. If you say one word, of course, I would teach hello in Mongolian. That's Sambanu. Sambanu. That can be also translated as hello, how are you? Once you learn this word and use it, well, whoever you meet, then they absolutely show you a good smile on their face, and start appreciating your effort to communicate with them. Yeah, is at least in the greeting. So I would say it's Sambano.
Great. I'm gonna ask you to send that in writing for me. So because I'm gonna write a summary of this interview in a LinkedIn article. So if you can write that down, spell that for me. I don't want to make a mistake. Very very important word.
Of course, no
It's a
worries. I
it's a
can do
word
that.
to connect immediately with a person. So I really like that. Yeah, if you can later send it. But very 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 important. Azula, unfortunately, we have to end, but I want to thank you so much for being part of this project. I want to thank you for sharing your insights, recommendation, experiences. I hope this interview also benefits you and brings you opportunities. As I mentioned, I want to put your contact information on the article so people can reach out to you. Mongolia does have opportunities to receive foreign business, foreign investment. So having someone like you, especially speaking English so well, and having this global mindset is a very important opportunity for foreigners to take advantage of working with you, for example. So thank you so much. Do you have any final comments or recommendations for everyone?
Um, of course, I thank you for inviting me to speak about communications and cultural aspects in Mongolia when it comes to doing business. In the beginning, I mentioned about my international exposure and network. So I guess today we focus mostly on Mongolia, but I'll be very happy to continue discussing with you and other viewers in terms of doing business actually internationally with the focus in Asia. And I hope that we will continue talking about how to reach the businesses and people coming from different nationalities through better communication. And I guess, feel free to contact me. All the contact, I think the links and everything will be provided by Rafael. So all the best in your important project as well. And I guess see you again. Yeah, see you soon.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.